Ori and the Blind Forest was one of my favorite games of all time. So to say that I was excited when Moon Studios announced a sequel was being developed at E3 2017 would be an understatement. And so 5 years and a short delay later, Ori and the Will of the Wisps has released, validating all of the hype that was behind it. The greatest part of these games is the movement. As you progress through Ori and the Will of the Wisps, you gain access to movement abilities from the original game as well as new ones that allow for seamless transition between water, ground, land, and air. You can slingshot off enemies, launch yourself through the air, dive through water, and grapple from walls. By the time you reach the back half of the game, you have so many movement options available to you that you can do almost anything that you want. Just moving through the game is so fun, and it's worth the price of the game alone. Will of the Wisps also saw a major step up in combat from the Blind Forest. Combat was very basic in the first game with a very small pool of damaging abilities. Will of the Wisps added many more abilities such as sword-style melee attacks, a bow and arrow, and a heavy hammer swing, among other things. Each of your abilities can be upgraded as well as mixed and matched with various skills to provide for a wide variety of gameplay options. And while most of the enemies are fairly straightforward, Will of the Wisps added boss battles that integrate many of these different combat styles and abilities, who are susceptible to different kinds of attacks. Each of the bosses were fairly challenging and engaging, even with maxed out abilities, and they were an outstanding addition to the game. While Will of the Wisps maintained the series' collectible system, it also saw the addition of quests. Now these weren't anything particularly complicated. Some of them were tied to collectibles and restoring a village in the middle of the forest, which was pretty neat, and the main side quest was a successive series of transactions with various NPCs until you ultimately unlocked the ability to see all of the secrets on the map, which made it a hell of a lot easier to get 100% completion. It was a small addition, but it was one more thing that you could keep an eye out for as you progress through the game, and I liked it. Will of the Wisps also maintained the original game's terrific puzzles. Each ability is eventually required in some sort of way to complete a puzzle, even if it's just one time. These puzzles do a fantastic job of integrating every single thing that the game has to offer and really make you think. There was one optional area in particular that had a couple very subtle clues given to you that are very easy to miss if you aren't paying attention. If you figure it out, you gain access to a passive 25% damage increase, which is a really strong skill to acquire. It's a very classic type of secret that you don't often see in games these days, that was just casually slipped in there, and it's the kind of thing that I really appreciate in a game. Will of the Wisps puzzles aren't convoluted, but they're excellently crafted. Will of the Wisps' story is just like its predecessors. It's not hugely complicated, it's basic, and it carries a lot of emotional weight with little dialogue. The Blind Forest was one of those games that hit you right in the feels, and Will of the Wisps is no different. It's the kind of game that made me need to take a break after finishing it, because it's a heartbreaker that makes you feel the need to decompress a bit before you jump back in to touch up your playthrough or move on to another game. Unsurprisingly, Will of the Wisps was a gorgeous game. The environments and backgrounds are all beautiful. Each area is very distinct from the others and has its own characteristics. It's just a pleasure to traverse the world and explore every single nook and cranny in the game. And the music for this series remains incredible. Whether it's the emotion of the story, intensity of the gameplay, or just the ambiance, Ori's music is as good as it gets in gaming, and I absolutely adore it. It's just a joy to play through these games. Up until a couple weeks ago, Ori and the Blind Forest was the best 2D platformer I had ever played, and it's now been surpassed by Ori and the Will of the Wisps. This game did everything the original did, but better. I freaking loved this game, and I cannot recommend it enough. I don't know if Moon Studios has any intention of making more Ori games, but I'm so glad that they chose to make a second one. Will of the Wisps is an amazing game, and it's going to be one of the best games released this year.